I will tell you a story that few dare to speak aloud, for it is a tale woven of pain, power, and silence. Beyond the towering vermilion gates of the Forbidden City, past the golden roofs that gleam beneath the sun, there existed a world where men became less than men, where their very bodies were sacrificed for a chance to step into the shadow of the dragon throne. These were the eunuchs of Imperial China, and though history remembers them as servants, schemers, and spies, few know the torment that defined their lives both within and beyond the palace walls. The transformation began with a single act of violence, one so profound that it erased not only the flesh but also the soul. Castration was no mere medical procedure, it was a ritual of annihilation. Boys, some scarcely older than 10, were taken to back-alley rooms where the air reeked of blood and fear. There, with crude instruments and no promise of survival, their future was carved away. Some bled to death within hours. Those who lived bore scars that never healed, both upon their bodies and within their hearts. Many did not choose this fate. Poverty often drove parents to sell their sons, trading their blood for a handful of coins. Others came willingly, lured by the illusion of privilege, believing that the palace would grant them a better life than the fields or the slums. But the moment they crossed through the Meridian Gate, the truth revealed itself. They were not men. They were tools, silent, disposable, and utterly bound to the will of the emperor. Life within the palace was a relentless ritual of control. Eunuchs woke before dawn to scrub endless corridors, to polish the lacquered floors until they reflected the glow of lanterns like black mirrors. They dressed the emperor in robes woven of gold thread, served his concubines with eyes fixed upon the ground, and memorized the 1,000 rules of etiquette that governed every breath within those walls. Even a single misplaced glance could cost them their lives. And yet, the greatest cruelty was not in the labor but in the silence. In the Forbidden City, words were dangerous. Every conversation could be overheard, every gesture misinterpreted. Younger eunuchs learned quickly to bow deeper, to speak less, and to listen always. Those who failed in this art of survival vanished. Some were quietly exiled to remote kitchens or sent to sweep the palace stables until their backs broke. Others were less fortunate, their names erased from the records, their bodies buried in nameless graves outside the capital. The hierarchy among eunuchs was its own kind of nightmare. Senior eunuchs wielded absolute power over the younger ones, demanding bribes and unquestioning obedience. Beatings in the shadows of the palace walls were common, and betrayal was a daily ritual. The closer one rose to the emperor's inner court, the sharper the knives became. Not the ones of steel, but those of whispers, rumors, and carefully planted accusations. And yet, the palace was more than a prison. It was a labyrinth of secrets. Eunuchs became the silent eyes and ears of the court, carrying messages for ministers, manipulating alliances among concubines, and even serving as instruments of imperial vengeance. They knew which concubine had fallen from favor before the emperor himself spoke it aloud. They knew which minister was plotting rebellion long before the guards made an arrest. In this world, knowledge was both power and poison. But for every eunuch who rose high, there were 100 who were cast down. And when their service ended, when age or misfortune drove them out through the palace gates, they discovered that there was no true life waiting for them beyond those walls. The world outside looked upon them with contempt. Ordinary men mocked them in the streets, and women turned away their eyes. Even their families, if they dared return to them, treated them as cursed beings who had lost the very essence of manhood. One such man was Li Wei. Once, he had been a trusted steward in the palace of the Wanli emperor. Ministers bowed when he passed. Concubines whispered favors in his ear. But when his master died and a new emperor took the throne, Li Wei was cast out. He returned to his village, expecting at least the comfort of home, only to find his parents long dead and his name spat upon like a bitter curse. The wealth he had earned within the palace was stolen by corrupt officials. Alone and despised, he spent his final years wandering the streets of Beijing, a shadow among men, until he was found one winter morning, frozen in a deserted alley. No one claimed his body. This was the fate of most eunuchs. Forgotten in life, erased in death. And yet, Every year, new boys came to the palace gates. Some came driven by hunger, others by ambition. They believed, as so many before them had believed, that they would be the ones to escape this cycle. That they would rise, survive, and perhaps even taste the forbidden fruit of power. But the palace consumed them all. And yet, within this vast machine of ritual and cruelty, there were rumors, whispers of something darker than mere servitude. There were tales of eunuchs who formed secret brotherhoods, who wielded influence far greater than the emperor himself suspected. Tales of alliances struck in shadowed corridors, of ministers who bowed not to the throne, but to the unseen power of the castrated men who served it. Whether these whispers were truth or mere fear, none could say. But I have seen the records, the sealed scrolls hidden deep in the imperial archives. And I tell you now, the true story of the eunuchs does not end in mere suffering. It is a tale of blood, betrayal, and conspiracies buried so deep that even the dragon throne trembled at their touch. And this, my listener, is where our descent begins. The Forbidden City was a world of silence by day and of whispers by night. Beneath its grand halls and lantern-lit corridors, where the scent of incense never faded, an unseen network thrived. A network forged not of loyalty but of fear, hunger, and ambition. This was the secret life of the eunuchs, a shadow realm that even the emperor himself could not fully control. It began, as many things in the palace did, with a single rumor. No one could remember who had spoken it first, but it spread like smoke through the servants' quarters and down into the hidden kitchens where the eunuchs gathered after their endless duties. The rumor spoke of a man named Zhang Yong, a senior eunuch whose power was said to rival that of the emperor's ministers. They called him the Silent Hand, for nothing within the palace seemed to move without his touch. Zhang Yong was not the largest or strongest of the eunuchs, but his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. He had served in the palace for decades, rising from the lowest ranks through cunning and careful cruelty. He controlled access to the emperor's inner chambers, decided which petitions were seen and which were burned, and even determined which concubines were summoned to the dragon throne at night. To displease him was to invite ruin. But there was more to Zhang Yong than his official power. In the quiet hours of the night, when the courtyards were empty and the moonlight turned the golden tiles to silver, he gathered his most loyal followers in a hidden chamber beneath the Hall of Supreme Harmony. There, in the flickering glow of oil lamps, they spoke of things forbidden, of ministers who needed to be removed, of concubines who might be persuaded, of silver that flowed unseen through the veins of the palace like lifeblood. It was here, in these secret meetings, that the true empire was ruled. The emperor, distant and veiled in ceremony, saw only what he was allowed to see. Zhang Yong, however, saw everything. He placed eunuchs in every corner of the court, in the kitchens, in the stables, in the bedchambers of imperial consorts. No whispered conversation was safe. No hidden letter remained unread. He was the invisible net in which the entire palace was caught. Yet not all eunuchs served him willingly. Some, like young Han Yu, were drawn into his shadow against their will. Han Yu had been in the palace only 2 years, a boy of 15 with a thin frame and haunted eyes. He had entered the Forbidden City believing, like so many before him, that obedience would keep him safe. But Zhang Yong had a way of binding men with chains that could not be seen. One night, Han Yu was summoned to the hidden chamber. There, amid the smell of lamp oil and the weight of silence, Zhang Yong placed a sealed scroll before him. "Deliver this," Zhang Yong said, his voice quiet but sharp, "and do not ask to whom." Han Yu obeyed. He carried the scroll through the labyrinth of corridors, past sleeping guards and watchful eunuchs, until at last he came to the quarters of one of the emperor's most favored concubines. She took the scroll without a word, her expression unreadable, and closed the door. The next morning, a minister was found stripped of his titles, his land seized, his family exiled. Han Yu never learned what was written in that scroll. He did not ask. He had seen enough to understand that questions in the Forbidden City were as dangerous as treason. But this was only the beginning. As weeks passed, Han Yu discovered that Zhang Yong's network stretched far beyond the palace walls. Merchants, smugglers, and even soldiers were said to be in his debt. Grain shipments vanished only to reappear in the hands of men loyal to him. Gold disappeared from imperial treasuries and resurfaced in secret payments to buy silence and obedience. It was as if Zhang Yong had built a second empire in the shadows, one ruled not by decrees and seals, but by fear and quiet promises. And yet, there were whispers of something even darker. Some said Zhang Yong kept a list, a secret record of every sin committed by the court's most powerful men and women. They said he stored it in a lacquered chest hidden deep beneath his private chambers, guarded by eunuchs who would kill without hesitation. Those who had seen it and lived spoke of scrolls inked in red, each bearing names that could topple the empire if ever revealed. It was this list that made him untouchable. No minister dared move against him. No concubine dared defy him. Even the emperor himself, it was whispered, feared to challenge the silent hand. Han Yu, young and terrified, tried to keep his head down. But the deeper he was drawn into Zhang Yong's web, the more he realized that there was no escape. Once a eunuch became part of the network, he belonged to it forever. The palace was not merely a prison of walls and gates. It was a prison of secrets, and every secret was another chain. And then, one night, something happened that even Zhang Yong had not foreseen. A eunuch, an older man named Lu Ren, was found dead in one of the palace storerooms. His throat had been cut, but there were no signs of a struggle. On his body, the guards found a single folded note, pressed into his palm as though left as a message. It bore only 3 characters, written in blood: the silent hand. For the first time in years, fear rippled through Zhang Yong's network. Someone had struck at them from within the palace itself. And in that moment, Han Yu realized the terrible truth. In the Forbidden City, even the most powerful eunuch could bleed. And this was only the beginning of the storm. The Forbidden City had always been a place of silence. But after Lu Ren's death, that silence became suffocating. It clung to the walls like damp mist, seeping into every corridor, every chamber, every breath. No official record spoke of the murdered eunuch, but his absence was a ghost that haunted every man who served within those crimson gates. It was not just a killing, it was a message, and every eunuch understood it, whether they dared admit it or not. Zhang Yong, the silent hand, acted swiftly, erasing Lu Ren as if he had never existed. His body was burned at dawn, his quarters sealed, and his name scratched from the records by clerks who did not dare to meet one another's eyes. Yet no act of erasure could silence the human tongue. The whispers grew stronger with every passing day. Some claimed Lu Ren had been passing information to an imperial minister, betraying Zhang Yong's network from within. Others said he had uncovered something dangerous, something that could shatter the Silent Hand's dominion. And then there were those who whispered darker tales still, that Lu Ren had died not because of treachery or ambition, but because he had spoken of the list, the secret that bound every eunuch in chains of fear. Han Yu heard these rumors everywhere, in the kitchens while polishing silver bowls until his fingers ached, in the laundry halls where steam rose from boiling vats like restless ghosts, even in the courtyards where the eunuchs swept the paving stones long after the moon had risen. No one spoke loudly, no one dared, but the words carried all the same. 3 nights after the murder, Han Yu was summoned. He was brought to Zhang Yong's private quarters, an austere chamber heavy with incense and shadow. The silent hand sat upon a low stool, his narrow eyes fixed upon a map of the palace laid out before him. Around him stood his most loyal eunuchs, their heads bowed, their faces as expressionless as carved masks. "Someone has mistaken my silence for weakness," Zhang Yong said. His voice was calm, but it carried the sharpness of a drawn blade. "I will not be mocked in my own palace." Han Yu knelt low, his forehead pressed against the cold floor. "You will watch," Zhang Yong continued. "You will listen. And if you hear a name, if you hear even the shadow of a name, you will bring it to me. Those who are loyal will be rewarded. Those who are not." He paused, and in that silence, Han Yu thought of Lu Ren's unmarked ashes. From that moment on, the palace changed. Every corridor felt heavier. Every glance carried suspicion. Eunuchs who had once shared quiet conversations now averted their eyes, afraid that even a friendly word might be misinterpreted as treason. Men who had served side by side for years began reporting one another to Zhang Yong's spies, hoping that a single act of betrayal might buy their own survival. But for all Zhang Yong's power, cracks were beginning to form. Han Yu saw it first in Qiu Fang, a sharp-tongued eunuch whose defiance had always been subtle but steady. One night, after their duties had ended, Han Yu followed Qiu through the winding passages of the palace. Qiu moved cautiously, glancing over his shoulder, until he reached a disused storeroom near the northern wall. Through a narrow crack in the door, Han Yu saw what should never have been seen. Inside, Qiu was not alone. 6 eunuchs stood around him, their faces pale, their eyes grim. Upon the floor lay a map of the palace, marked with charcoal symbols. Han Yu strained to hear their words. He caught only fragments, proof, the list. Before Zhang Yong strikes again, Han Yu's blood turned cold. He fled, heart pounding, his mind screaming at him to run straight to Zhang Yong. And yet he did not. For the first time since entering the palace, Han Yu hesitated. He saw in Qiu's face no madness, no fear, only determination. What if Qiu was right? What if Zhang Yong's reign was not as unshakable as it seemed? The next night, fire came to the Forbidden City. It began in one of the lesser halls, an explosion of flames that devoured lacquered beams and painted screens alike. The blaze lit the night sky with an infernal glow, and as eunuchs and guards scrambled to contain it, Han Yu saw Zhang Yong standing at the edge of the chaos, his face illuminated by firelight. For the first time, the silent hand looked uncertain. The fire was no accident. Everyone knew it. It had started in a hall rumored to contain copies of Zhang Yong's most guarded records. Whether they had been consumed by the flames or spirited away by unseen hands, no one could say. But Zhang Yong's fury was unmistakable. His eyes, cold and narrow, promised retribution. From that night on, the palace was no longer merely a prison. It was a battlefield. Zhang Yong unleashed a wave of purges. Eunuchs were seized in the dead of night, dragged screaming from their quarters. Some vanished forever. Others were returned days later, broken, their tongues cut out so that they could never speak again. And yet, the resistance only burrowed deeper. Qiu Fang and his conspirators moved like phantoms, striking in silence and vanishing just as quickly. Han Yu lived between two worlds, trapped between the ruthless grip of Zhang Yong and the desperate whispers of the conspirators. He said nothing. He could not. One word, one gesture would condemn him. And so he drifted through the palace like a ghost, a silent witness to a war no emperor would ever acknowledge. And then came the second death. A eunuch named Bao Ming was found in the lotus pond at dawn. His throat had been slit, his body weighted down with stones. When the guards pulled him from the water, they discovered a single piece of parchment clenched in his hand. 3 characters, written in ink black as night. The silent hand. This was no rebellion born of fear. This was vengeance. And vengeance, Han Yu realized, would not end until the palace was drowned in blood. The death of Bao Ming shattered what little illusion of control remained. His corpse, dragged from the lotus pond, was not merely another body, it was a declaration. The conspirators had drawn blood, and they wanted Zhang Yong to know it. The palace changed overnight. Guards doubled their patrols, their boots pounding on the stone floors like distant drums of war. Eunuchs moved in fearful silence, eyes darting like hunted animals. The ministers, pale and tense, avoided the palace corridors after dusk, for the Forbidden City no longer belonged to the emperor. It belonged to the war in the shadows. Zhang Yong struck back with fury. His loyalists scoured every corner of the palace, pulling men from their beds in the dead of night. Interrogations bled into torture. Eunuchs were beaten until their screams echoed through the empty courtyards. Some were never seen again. Others were left broken, their tongues cut out, their eyes empty, living warnings for all who watched. And yet, for every man Zhang Yong silenced, 2 more joined Qiu Fang's secret cause. Han Yu moved through this nightmare like a ghost, trapped between two worlds. He served Zhang Yong faithfully by day, bowing low and delivering messages, his face a mask of obedience. But at night, he heard the whispers of Qiu Fang, of hidden meetings, of something they called the List of Crimson Ink. It was said that this list contained the sins of the palace. Every bribe, every betrayal, every forbidden act committed by ministers, concubines, and eunuchs alike was recorded there, inked in a red so dark it was said to be mixed with blood. And if Qiu Fang could seize it, Zhang Yong's empire would collapse in a single night. Han Yu did not want to believe it, but he had seen enough to know it was true. Then one night Qiu Fang found him. It was in the deserted servants' hall, long after the lanterns had burned low. Han Yu had been scrubbing the floors when Qiu's shadow fell across him. "You've been watching," Qiu said, his voice low, sharp as a knife's edge. "You've seen what Zhang Yong does. You've heard the screams. You know he cannot be allowed to rule forever." Han Yu said nothing, but Qiu's eyes burned into him. "We will take him down," Qiu continued. "But we need you. You walk in both worlds, you are close enough to Zhang Yong to know his movements. Help us, and you will live to see him fall. Refuse." He leaned closer. "And when he drags you into his dungeons, do not expect anyone to speak your name." Han Yu nodded. He did not know if it was loyalty or fear that made him do it, but in that moment he chose his path. The next week passed like a fever dream. Qiu's network grew bolder, striking at Zhang Yong's spies in the dead of night, leaving their bodies in places where they would be found by dawn. The palace became a graveyard of silent warnings. Zhang Yong, furious and desperate, tightened his grip, summoning more guards, sealing entire wings of the palace, forbidding any eunuch from leaving his quarters after dusk. And yet, in his paranoia, he made a mistake. Han Yu discovered it one night, while carrying wine to Zhang Yong's private chamber. Through the half-open door, he saw the silent hand kneeling before a lacquered chest, his gnarled fingers tracing its edges as if it were sacred. Then, with a key hidden in his sleeve, he unlocked it. Inside, Han Yu saw scrolls, dozens of them, bound in silk, each marked with the crimson seal of secrecy. He knew at once what they were. The list. He said nothing. He did nothing. But when he returned to his quarters that night, Qiu Fang was waiting in the shadows. "The chest," Han Yu whispered. "He keeps it beneath his floorboards. He guards it himself." Qiu smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "Then it ends tonight." The final act came in silence. Under the cover of midnight, while the palace slept, Qiu Fang and his loyalists moved like shadows. Han Yu followed them, his hands trembling, his heart hammering against his ribs. They entered Zhang Yong's chambers without a sound. The silent hand awoke to the sight of knives glinting in the lantern light. He did not beg. He did not scream. He only stared at Qiu Fang with eyes that burned with hatred. "Even if you kill me," Zhang Yong rasped, his voice calm even as the blades drew close, "the palace will always belong to men like me." Qiu said nothing. He slit Zhang Yong's throat in one clean stroke. Blood spilled across the floor, pooling like ink. Han Yu stood frozen, unable to look away. They dragged the lacquered chest from beneath the floor and opened it. Inside lay the truth. The names of ministers, concubines, eunuchs, and even imperial relatives, each scroll a noose waiting to be tightened. Qiu Fang held them high, his expression one of grim triumph. By dawn, Zhang Yong was gone, and his name, like Lu Ren's before him, was erased from the records. Officially, the silent hand had died of illness. Unofficially, every eunuch in the palace knew the truth. But if they expected freedom, they were fools. Qiu Fang replaced Zhang Yong. The chest was locked again. The whispers continued. The war in the shadows had merely changed its master. And Han Yu, standing in the cold light of morning, finally understood the cruelest truth of all. In the Forbidden City, the throne might belong to the emperor, but the palace would always belong to the eunuchs.